Hey guys, today I show you the basics of Najdorf Defense. This is a super classical opening. After watching this video, you'll understand the most important ideas in Najdorf and you should be able to play it and include it in your repertoire, as we'll cover the main lines white can play. Notice that Sicilian is the most popular defense versus King's Pawn, and at the same time, Najdorf is the most popular Sicilian variation. There is a reason for this popularity, and it is that this defense is super strong. So let's get into how to play Najdorf, but before we do that, let me tell you an interesting fact. Miguel Najdorf, the master this opening is named after, died in 1997, and he faced all the world champions from Capablanca to Kasparov. That's a big amount of world champions for only one player. Well, let's see Sicilian defense Najdorf variations. So e4, c5 Sicilian, knight f3, d6 is a very useful move in Sicilian, in many Sicilian variations. White plays open with d4, then we accept, of course, knight takes d4, and we develop the knight of the king side, also attacking the central pawn on e4. They have to play knight c3, and at this point we have many options. This is a moment where we can decide which Sicilian variation we can play. For example, you can play here dragon with g6, or you can also play Scheveningen with e6, or classical with knight c6. But of course, the move that we are going to study, or the opening that we're going to study, is going to be Najdorf with a6 here. So the first thing that we need to understand very well is, why is a6 such an important move here? Why is this making sense? I mean, the other lines at least are developing something, but in Najdorf you just play a6. What's the meaning of this move? We're going to understand it because it's essential and it's key to understand what is happening in the next moves. So when we play a6 here, there are some benefits. First of all, black wants to play e5. That's like the main idea here in Najdorf, and this is something we're going to talk about very soon. But there is a problem, and it is that if we play e5 directly, we're going to be in trouble because the knight is going to be coming to f5. So that's something we want to make sure that does not happen, right? If you play e5, you don't want the move knight f5 to be okay. You don't want that move to work, because if that move works, the knight is going to be very annoying controlling here, also e7. So the problem is that they can give a check. I mean, they cannot go directly, of course, because we can take, but they can play bishop b5 check. And for example, let's say we block with knight d7. Now they can play knight f5. And this position is very complicated. It's very good, extremely good for white. For example, you play queen c7 here, they can play bishop g5. And the advantage is bigger and bigger every time. Right now, for example, they're removing the knight and they're getting the square d5. So if that happens, we're going to be in trouble. Right now, we do have the threat of playing e5, and we are going to play it in many lines. Just to illustrate the point here, if white plays some random move, I don't know, rook b1, here we can play e5, in fact. We got what we wanted. Now knight f5 is not really going to work. You can, for example, you can just trade here and play pawn to d5, and this position is great. We are a little better here with black pieces. Or even better, also, instead of taking, you can play d5 here, and this is also very strong. The advantage is bigger for black this time. So what I'm saying is that we have a real threat here. Once we play a6, now we're playing e5, and we're getting, in general, at least an equal position. The other benefit of playing this move a6 is that in the long run, the pawn on a6 is always useful, because you want to play b5. You will play it. In all these lines, we want to expand on the queen side. So you need the pawn on a6 for sure. Finally, the third advantage of playing this a6 is that it's like some kind of waiting move that keeps a flexible development. As for example, later you can play either e6 or e5, depending on how white plays, or you can play bishop d7 or bishop b7, depending on how white develops. And the same thing for the knight, right? So you can play knight c6 or knight d7, and you can make decisions depending on how white plays in the next moves. So basically your bishop, your knight, and your pawn, your e-pawn, can be moved more accurately depending on how white plays now. So that's another good thing about this a6. It's like also some kind of waiting move, something useful that we can play as they continue their development and they state how they are going to do things in the next moves. So we're going to continue with the theory of Najdorf defense, and we're going to cover the main alternatives for white in this position. But first, let's make sure that we understand these 3 key points that I'm going to explain. These points are going to help you a lot to understand the moves that are coming in the theory. So the moves that are coming are going to follow these rules that we are going to talk about now. So it's really important to understand this. Also keeping in mind that very often our opponent is going to go out of theory. It can happen a lot, especially in these super sharp, complicated, and wide openings that can happen all the time. So we need to understand the positions. We need to understand the principles and the strategy of that defense that we are playing. So if something like that happens, we know how to react in case of we go out of theory. So the first point I want to say is black wants to play e5. That's something we already highlighted, but we didn't say that we are not going to play e5 when there is a bishop on g5 or when the bishop is on c4. So in these lines, bishop g5 or bishop c4, the move e5 is not really going to work. When the bishop is on g5, e5 is just weakening too much the square d5. And they are able to remove this knight, which is the key defender of d5, anytime they want. So whenever that happens, probably we'll play with e6 most of the time. And something similar happens with the bishop on c4. This bishop controls d5 and also puts pressure here on f7. So playing a5 is like weakening too much. It's like underestimating the power of that bishop too much. So in general, keep that rule in mind. You want to play e5, but be careful if there is a bishop on g5 or a bishop on c4. It might be a little better to play just e6, more solid and still good. Key point number 2 about Najdorf defense is going to be that in those lines where we're actually able to play e5, so let's assume they play the line with bishop e2 and then we play e5 finally. Well, in those lines, your opponent will have 2 options. The knight can come over f3 or over b3. So I think it's really good to understand what is going to happen in each line. So when the knight goes to f3, it's going to be a more positional play. The knight goes to f3 because it's closer to the center and also closer to the king, because usually they will castle kingside in these lines. So usually this leads to more positional play. On the other side, when the knight goes to b3, it's because the king is going to be somewhere on the queen side, and at the same time they don't want to block the pawns because they want to expand, they want to use the pawn storm, and as you can imagine, the position will be complicated, will be sharper because they will be attacking over there, and probably we will be attacking over here. So that's something we need to understand. Knight f3, slower positions, knight b3, sharper positions. And finally, the third point I want to highlight for Najdorf defense with black pieces is that once you're able to play e5, you will create a weakness here on d6, and also you will create another weakness here on d5. So how is this good? Why are we wanting to play e5 so much? And actually we're just creating 2 weaknesses in our structure. Well, the thing is that these weaknesses are not really that weak when we have these things here. So when you have the knight on f6, the bishop on e6, and the bishop on e7, the weaknesses are totally defended, totally covered, so we are totally okay if that happens. So that's why we are trying to play e5, because with this setup of bishop e7, e6, and knight f6, the weaknesses are protected. Observe the bishop defends the backward pawn on d6, and the bishop on e6 and the knight are also guarding the knight, the square d5. So if the knight goes there, we are able to make a trade happen, and probably the outpost will disappear. So the weakness on d5 disappears, and the same thing for the pawn on d6. It won't be a weakness anymore once the pawn is here on d5. Keep in mind that once you have this structure, you're trying to play d5 all the time. It's going to be a threat, and it's going to be really hard to stop for white. And if you can play d5, you are going to be at least equal in most positions. So that's the idea of this setup. You're very solid, you're defending the weaknesses very well, but you're not going to stay there forever. You're always trying to play d5, and that's the problem. That's why this is totally okay for black. Now we understand these 3 points. I think we are in much better shape to understand the moves and the theory that is coming, but basically they are going to be corresponding these concepts that we just learned. So the 3 main lines in this position for white are going to be bishop g5, is the most common move among beginners and club players in general. Bishop e3 also very normal and very playable, and bishop to e2. These three moves are very common, and we're going to see those a lot or a little more than the other sidelines. The sidelines, we are not going to cover them here. That's not the idea. This is an introduction to Najdorf, but you should know that there are moves here, like for example, f4, f3, g3, a4, h3. Bishop to c4 is an important variation. In some next video, we can cover the sidelines. If you really like this one, and you just let me know in the comments, and of course, I will happily create a second video for the sidelines. So right now, we're going to advance with the three main lines that we need to know: bishop g5, bishop e3, and bishop e2. So if your opponent plays bishop g5, this line is a little sharp, complicated, and popular at the same time. Remember, here we are not playing e5. Remember the concept that we studied some minutes ago. The bishop is very annoying here, and is also attacking your knight, so you cannot weaken d5 that much. So after bishop g5, we just play something normal here, like pawn to e6, also reinforcing the pawn, the square d5. Usually white is going to play f4, and we're going to develop with bishop e7, totally normal. We need to highlight the poison pawn variation with queen b6 here, and this line is very sharp, complicated, but in general it's interesting, and of course very playable. It's probably the most common move here, but as an introduction, I rather just talk about the normal development, and I show you the normal line instead of this line. But well, in this line, what is going to happen is, like, probably they play this, and then they give you the pawn. So they give you the poisoned pawn. It's like, it's like they will have compensation, right? So they play rook b1, attacking the queen goes to a3. And well, this position is very complicated, very unclear. In general, white has compensation. There is a lot of theory behind this. Of course, many games, including Masters games, of course. So that's the poisoned pawn variation. It's very interesting, but today I'm going to suggest, instead of queen b6, I'm going to suggest the normal development with bishop to e7. Here they can play queen f3, we can play queen c7 here. We are aiming for a knight on d7, a bishop on e7, and a queen on c7 here. That's the idea, right? A knight here, queen here. It's another setup that we should try to remember for this line. But also, there is something interesting here. If we play knight d7 first, there is this move that is a little tricky, bishop c4, with some pressure here on e6. And if you play queen c7 at this point, you're falling for a very nice trick by white. They can play here bishop takes pawn, and if you capture, they capture back. So they're getting 2 pawns, but they're going to get a third pawn. Our king is totally open. It's going to be a check. They have a lot of control in the center, a lot of space, a lot of activity with the minor pieces. So in general, this position is going to be very good for white. Actually, we should say it's decisive advantage for white. So that being said, let's develop the queen first, so we don't weaken e6, and also we control here, and we avoid those things. White castles queenside. Now we can play knight d7, and we have the setup that we were talking about. Well, here g4 is a very common move, probably the main line here. There is also some bishop d3 over there. After g4, you can play b5, and well, this is what happens in Najdorf, right? Well, especially in this line, this is what happens. They attack over there, you attack over here. It's a complicated position, very dynamic, very entertaining, very interesting. So well, after this, main line is bishop takes knight. You can capture back, of course. They play g5, and you play knight d7. Here, the theory suggests something like f5, very aggressive. They want to attack really, really quickly. Even when they're losing some pawn over there, they want to attack. And of course, there is a line where we take that pawn with check, and that's totally okay, totally playable. But also, I would like to talk about this line with knight c5. I think it's very interesting, and we can play that. Usually white plays f6 here. We capture, they capture back, and we play bishop f8. I'm not going to advance too much more in the theory, because especially among beginners, intermediate players, we won't need it. And also, this is an introduction, so you will understand things step by step. You don't need to understand all the theory in the first time. So I think it's fine up to this moment. You need to understand that you are attacking on the queen side, and he's attacking on the king side, but also on in the center, because our king is still in the center. So yeah, it's a complicated position. Maybe white is a little better, but anything can happen here. So that's the line of bishop to g5. Let's take a look at the other line, and this one they play bishop to e3. So this time we are actually able to play what we wanted. We can play e5 here, and after e5 they, as we said, they can play either knight f3 or knight to b3. And also we said knight f3 positional, knight b3 a little sharper. Well, if knight f3, you can play here something like bishop to e7. And our plan is to create the setup of the 3 minor pieces over there around the weaknesses that we have on d6 and d5. So that's our plan. I don't know if they can try bishop to c4, for example, but then you can play bishop to e6. In general, this position is totally okay for black. There's no problem here. So this is very interesting, very playable. Black is totally okay here. So that's the line of knight f3. The line where they play knight b3 is something like this. You play bishop to e7, they play f3, and then you play bishop to e6. One more time, 3 pieces over there in a perfect setup. They can play queen d2. Again, there is a lot of theory here in these positions. I'm not going to cover all this. I want to suggest one move. There are some options for black. I want to suggest this one, h5, because in general, when our opponent is attacking on a wing of the board, we don't touch anything there. We don't move pieces over there. We don't move pawns especially. But there is a principle that states that if you can delay or hinder his attack a lot with a pawn move, then maybe something we could consider. And that's what happens with this h5. So h5, we're moving a pawn, but now they cannot play g4. So it's going to make things much harder for white on the king side. So it's an interesting line. In general, it's around equal, maybe slightly better for white at some point, but the position is still very interesting. And the plans for black are clear. You want to play knight d7, queen c7, b5, and fire over there. Very often knight b6 or knight c5. After that, if the knight goes to b6, you can go to c4. So there are many interesting options after this. Also, sometimes you can break on d5. So yeah, it's totally interesting. And one more time, anything can happen in this kind of positions. Anyone can win. So that's all we need to know about this line of bishop e3 by now. And we continue with the line of bishop to e2. Is the third main line that we're going to cover in this video. So, you know, bishop e2, one more time, we are able to play what we wanted. We can play e5. This is totally okay. And here, well, you know, knight f3 and knight b3, they are both playable. Let's take a look at this. If they play knight f3, you just play bishop to e7. And this is something more or less similar, right? One more time, we're going to develop the bishop to e6. We are going to castle. The knight can be developed over d7. We are going to expand over here. And it's a very interesting position, but similar to the previous line that we saw. And if the knight goes to b3, well, this time we are going to play the move bishop to e7. They are going to castle. And we can castle as well. And for example, they can play king h1, which is a common idea to move the king. As they are trying to play f4, they don't want to put the king on the diagonal. So king h1 will play knight c6, normal development, also controlling the square e5, because sometimes it's a square that we are going to use for the knight after some trade in some positions that can happen. And also it's a good idea to not rush with the development of the bishop. I mean, it's a theoretical move, but in general, I think it's a little better if you develop the knight first, because they can be getting extra tempi with f4 and f5 and those things. So in general, this move should be slightly better. Just develop the knight first and make sure the bishop is not attacked on e6 too early. And here, well, white can play with f3 or with f4. If they play with f4, you react immediately on the queen side, so you cannot stay there just doing nothing, right? So we expand and we develop pieces over there. If they play f5, very often we play bishop b7, as the bishop cannot be developed over here. We go to the fianchetto, where it's going to be really powerful, pressure in the center, same diagonal as the king, but also reinforcing some break on d5. So that's the idea when they play with f4. But also, when they play with f3, well, then the bishop is going to be fine here on e6 this time, as the pawn did not advance that much. We have the setup that we highlighted at the beginning in the key points for Najdorf defense. So guys, these are some of the things I want you to know as an introduction for Najdorf defense. As I said, this is a super important opening. If you learn it, if you understand it, and if you like it, and you can play it in your games, it's a really, really good opening. There is a lot of theory behind, but as I said earlier, if you understand the positions, if you remember the key points for the middle game strategy for black, it's going to be different and much more entertaining and easier to play this line. Keep in mind that we saw only the 3 main lines for Najdorf Defense, and also not too deeply. I just want you to understand the main ideas and be able to play it at a club player level. But the idea is to get a little deeper depending on how you react with this video and the things that you ask me and you comment. Of course, I would be happy to go a little deeper in the theory of the lines, and also I would be happy to show you the side lines that I did not cover totally intentionally in this video because I didn't want to make a video too long. Well, that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. Check out this video over here. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Like, subscribe, play the right move, and see you on the next.